Hello, my name is Frank Brazel, and for my research project for this course, I studied the social and economic impacts of the construction of Interstate 77 through South Carolina between Charlotte and Columbia. Specifically, my research question was how did the construction of Interstate 77 impact three different municipalities of varying size during the construction of Interstate 77? And this is relevant because while research has been done on a macro scale, uh, considering the impact of interstate construction on rural communities, on urban communities, there's been very limited study specific to South Carolina. And I thought that there wasn't enough research that dealt with people and people's stories and the experience of an area where I grew up. And so I wanted to look specifically at three communities, two rural, one a small metropolitan area, Columbia, and see how interstate construction impacted them differently. And then methodologically speaking, I drew inspiration from two different sources. One was Chandra and Thompson's work, again, on a macro scale, looking at the impact of interstate construction on rural communities throughout the country. And the other, which I think developed more of a framework for me, or showed me more of a framework, was a series of case studies done by Gutfreund, where essentially he looked at three different sized municipalities in different parts of the country and how highway construction impacted them. Some key primary sources that I used during this assignment really were newspaper sources, particularly when I was dealing with Columbia. There's quite a newspaper record, both from the Columbia Record, which no longer exists, and the state newspaper that charts from the late 1960s, when this project was first envisioned in this area, until 1995, when it wrapped up. There's plenty of newspaper sources that demonstrates what kind of growth, what kind of challenges the construction of I-77 brought to the people of that area. And then I also utilized two oral interviews, one with Maxine Tate, who's a longtime resident of Great Falls, South Carolina. She was able to provide me some information on what life was like during and after construction in both Great Falls and the town of Richburg. Essentially, from her perspective, the construction of the interstate, which went right through Richburg, put that town on the map, so to speak, and caused Great Falls to diminish. Now, the data that I put together, particularly the qualitative data from newspaper articles, determined that Great Falls still took advantage and benefited from the construction of I-77. So her memory, her perspective it didn't align exactly with what I found looking through different source materials. And then in summary, though, I found very similarly to what Gutfreund and what Chandra and Thompson found in their other research on similar topics, I found that there are many factors that play into whether or not interstate construction is more economically and socially beneficial or detrimental to an area. Much of it has to do with the proximity of that municipality to the interstate. Much of it has to do with what that municipality looked like before the interstate went in. Columbia was dealing with issues of urban sprawl brought on by the construction of the I-77 Southern Beltway, which is the last stretch of I-77, the far southern stretch of it, and it goes around the east side of Columbia. That's an issue that these other two towns, that were much smaller to begin with, didn't deal with. I found that proximity to the interstate had a lot to do with how it impacted local economies and local businesses. Richburg, prior to the construction of I-77, which runs right through it, had a very small population, only about 400 or so people. And it wasn't along a major north-south roadway between Columbia and Charlotte. However, after the construction of I-77, Richburg saw some growth in small business areas, well, not just small business, but in areas of business related to travel, in particular, things like motels, gas stations, things that grew up along the route. Whereas Great Falls The process of construction benefited that municipality because it became the primary north-south thoroughfare while I-77 was being constructed. And so a lot of traffic, even military traffic from Fort Jackson, went through Great Falls. And so during that period, that town benefited. And of course, after construction, they, like Columbia, benefited from industrial development, distribution center development, new infrastructure to support the interstate. And so there are many factors that when it comes to trying to predict whether or not an interstate is going to benefit or be detrimental to a community. But in general, I found that across the board, in one form or fashion, at one time or another, interstate construction does benefit local communities.